So a while back, our friend Titus proposed that we have a podcast dedicated to the movie Get Out. This was a problem since Mock was the only one who had seen it, but I finally got around to watching it too. So without further ado, let's drop some change. All of the lights. Welcome back, everybody, to the Six Pennies podcast. Today we have a special treat for you. We have Mock on the line, and we have a special guest this weekend. He's up in town here in Dallas. He's sitting right next to me in my guest room. Titus, how are you doing?
Good. It's good to be with you guys. How's it going?
Yeah, so we're going good. We love what we do at Six Pennies podcast. The reason why we have you on today, Titus, is because we're talking about your favorite movie of the last 2 to 3 years. We're talking about Get Out. I guess first initial reactions, Mock, to Get Out. How did you feel about it?
Well, first of all, let this be a forewarning to everyone else out there. If you're gonna make a request for a specific podcast topic like Titus did, just be prepared that we'll drag you onto this thing. Join us. But my first reaction when I saw the trailer, is that what you asked?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, when I first saw the trailer, I didn't really know what to think. I thought it was a pretty ridiculous trailer. Like, nothing about it made me actually want to go see it. What about you guys?
Yeah, it was the exact same for me. I saw the trailer and I was just like, there's no way that this movie is going to be good. Like, I'm not going to watch this movie. It's not even worth redboxing.
Yeah,
but then,
exactly.
Sure enough, reviews were coming out and they were crazy hot.
You guys read reviews?
And I just jumped right into it.
Wow.
It sucked me in.
Yeah, I didn't read reviews, but I definitely heard about it. Like, it was all the buzz on Twitter, and then I checked it out on Rotten Tomatoes. I didn't read anything, but I just checked out how it was doing. And I think when I checked it out, it was at 100% or 99%. So I was like, what the heck?
I guess, like, we follow different people on Twitter, Mock, because I had no hype about this movie. I had, like,
oh, really?
no exposure. I personally didn't watch the trailer or anything like that. I just saw, Titus on our Facebook page. He asked us to talk about the movie as a social commentary, and I finally watched it, and it is pretty deep. Like, my initial reactions were like, this movie is kind of out from left field, but then the more you think about it and the more you hear people converse and discuss the movie, you kind of realize that it has a much deeper meaning than just a movie. So after the trailer, I know, like, for Titus and yourself, Mock, like, you guys didn't have any expectations or any anticipation on how good the movie was. But did you guys have any initial thoughts to it? Like, what did you think the movie was going to be about?
So I heard it was going to be, like, really deep, like you said, like a social commentary type movie. But at the same time, since it was like the Jordan Peele guys, or wait, was it just Peele directing it? I thought it'd be, like, really funny, but that didn't come through at all in the trailer. So when I saw it kind of categorized as a comedy / horror, I thought it would be one of those two. Like, it would fit either into go like the real comedic route or go a scary route and real horror movie. But that's just not what I saw.
Yeah. What about you, Titus?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think if anything, I went into it just intrigued, and
yeah.
I didn't know what to expect. When you look at those two genres in particular, horrors and comedies, you really never have amazing movies come out of that, right? I mean, if you're talking horrors, you've got to go back a couple decades since there was an amazing horror movie,
like The Exorcist or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And then when you're talking comedies, they're always so lighthearted that no one can really take it seriously. So I had no idea why people would rate this at 99% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, and that's kind of low for you, right, Titus? 99. Yeah. So a little backstory is, like, as soon as I watched it, I kind of told Titus, "Hey, the movie's pretty good, but 99? Are you serious?" And he was like, "Yeah, man. Like, just read about it, do your research on it." And then we instigated another friend of ours, Josh Mall, to watch it. And usually Josh and I are very similar in taste in terms of, like, style, music, and movies and things like that. And I was like, Josh, like, 1 to 100, what would you rate it and why? And then for one day he was like, I'd say like 85, like 80, 85, and I felt a little better about myself because I was like, okay, I'm not the only crazy person. But then the very next day or very next morning, he like sends Titus and I like 20 messages about how he read up and did research on the movie afterwards. And then he was like, "Man, it's a 99, guys. It's like a
Oh,
99
sick.
100 movie." Yeah, to segue, if you were to rate the movie from 1 to 100, Mock, where would you put it and why?
So I'm about in the same range as Josh originally was. I think I had it between 75 and 80. I definitely enjoyed it, but it's just one of those movies. Like, it doesn't fit any particular category, right? It's
Yeah.
not, they categorize it as, comedy or horror and horror, but it's not. I feel like it's not funny enough to really be a comedy. It's not scary enough to really be a horror movie. I love the social commentary part. If you went to the movie just for that, then yeah, it's definitely a 9900. But it's just so hard to really judge the movie. So I have it right about an 80, which isn't bad. It's just not like 9900, like perfect movie. Like, I'd see it
Yeah,
again and watch it again
perfect.
over and over and over.
Perfect. Yeah, so what about you, Mr. Titus?
So I see it with the 99% of other people in this world. I would definitely give it a 99. And I hear you, Mock, on not really fitting in a category, but I think that's what makes this movie great. Is it really didn't fit in one category in particular, but different people found different reasons why they enjoyed the movie. The other thing about it is just the number of layers within this movie.
Mm.
I mean, to be
Yeah.
honest, when I finished the movie, I mean, I think I can say I was on the edge of my seat for basically the entire movie once things started getting started and such. But after I finished the movie, I think I was right with you. I was, kind of at an 80, 85.
So
But
it
then
increased after you read up on it.
without reading,
Oh, okay.
I think just thinking back
Oh.
on the different layers and all the mini details, it really pulled the movie together for me.
And Mock, you love that, right? You love when you watch a movie and you think about it for like weeks afterwards.
Yeah. No, I definitely have been. I just, when it, I guess it all comes down to personal scale, right? For a movie, for 99 to 100, like it comes down to rewatchability for me. And this isn't a movie that, not to say that it wasn't good, not to say that I didn't like it, not to say that I'm not still thinking about it like a couple months later, but rewatchability, I just feel like isn't there. Like, no part of me wants to really rewatch that movie. I don't feel like I missed anything. I don't feel like it was funny enough to rewatch or scary enough to rewatch. But I mean, I definitely recommend everyone watch it. So I think there's a really thin line there.
Yeah, so I will ask tougher questions later. Like, we'll get into the deeper things. We keep alluding to social commentary or all the different racial undertones. But I will say one caveat of when I was watching it, and I hope Titus doesn't get mad at me. But so I was working from home that one day, and it was like maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon because I heard the movie's really scary. For me, it's really scary. So I made sure it's like really sunny outside. The windows were up, the blinds were open, and stuff like that. And I was working as well, so I wasn't paying attention to the movie at 100%. It was probably like 80, 85%, and so maybe I missed some of the really clever nuances throughout the movie. But I don't know, like when you rate a movie like 99%, 99 or 100 or even 85, like you're supposed to have a movie, in my opinion, without any flaws, without like just if it's a comedy, it's supposed to be really, really funny. If it's a horror movie, it should be really scary. But it was neither of those, in my opinion. So I can't really give it a perfect score. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Okay, so according to like Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb and like the movie's homepage, actually, it's listed as a comedy and a horror. We'll touch base on horror later, but if it's listed as a comedy, Titus, like, what is so funny about it? And can you even detail like a really funny scene that made you laugh?
Yeah, so this is where I think it all comes together for me as far as the movie being, labeled as both comedy and horror. I thought the great thing about Get Out was that there are different scenes in the movie where it's so creepy that it's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious how creepy it is.
Yeah.
Like I would just scoff in the movie just because it was so ridiculously creepy uh, and unexpected that it was funny. And then the absolute reverse too.
Yeah.
It'd be so awkwardly funny, some of these scenes, that it'd just be absolutely terrifying at the same time.
Like, can you name a funny scene?
Yeah, so one that's, I think, apart from the whole play on the TSA, I thought that was, just kind of a great allusion to, society now and the police. And even bringing in the TSA was just a good play on that. But, I think one example of what I'm talking about is when there's the family, and then we're talking spoilers, right? In this podcast.
Yeah.
So you've got the grandpa, the African American grandpa, and the main character. His name's Chris. He goes outside for a smoke, and it's the middle of the night. He goes outside for a smoke, and then you've just got this huge, grandpa running from 100 yards, like 100 yards away.
It was so fast.
He's just sprinting like hardcore directly at Chris, and that was so absolutely terrifying. I mean,
that was
there's no situation in life when somebody running full speed at you, like that's never a good thing, right? So this guy just runs straight at Chris, and then right when he gets about an arm's length away, the dude just turns away from him. Off. And
it was an amazing cut, man.
I thought it was an amazing cut.
Leonard Fournette.
Yeah. I thought that was absolutely terrifying. I laughed out loud when he cut. And, I think what kind of...
So you laugh when you get scared?
I just thought it was so ridiculous that I just laughed. And what kind of connected with that, too, was how social media just played off of that. I don't know if you guys have seen the hashtag, the Get Out Challenge.
No.
So it's basically like a Facebook Live
that's
a Snapchat.
What it's about.
It's a Snapchat challenge. So, you have kids just running directly at the camera, and they try to make that cut at the last second. Most of the time they run directly into the camera. It's hilarious.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So the funniest thing that I can think of, the whole TSA thing, I feel like that was the only outright comedic relief in the movie. You have other parts that, they make you laugh maybe, but kind of not in the traditional sense, not in a traditional comedy sense, you know what I mean? Like that running scene. But the funniest thing to me was just the internet winning and the memes that came after that. They showed, the Get Out challenge with Usain Bolt and the grandpa beating Usain Bolt and stuff like that. It was just really funny.
So now it's kind of connecting the dots for me, because I have seen that social media movement, and now I guess for some reason I thought it was related to Donald Trump, like get out of the country or something. But I guess Get Out the movie, that makes more sense. Okay, cool. What about like a really, really, so that was so scary that it was funny. So what is like just an outright scary scene where you kind of like freaked out or creeped out, or does that hit both horror and comedy, that one scene? Titus?
Really that was more probably comedy for me. I think if you talk horror, I think one of the most chilling scenes was towards the end of the movie, and the main antagonist, her name's Rose, right? She's the black guy's girlfriend in the movie.
Chris, yeah.
So Rose at the end, she's kind of the, what do they call it, the honey bucket of the whole scam, right? So she's bringing in all these quote unquote hosts for them to run a brain transplant on. So she's really jacked up in the movie. Like she's just a horrible person, and she's extremely manipulative. She's literally pure evil.
Yeah.
And so you get to the end of the movie, and Chris, the main character, he's all locked up, and they're prepping him to remove his brain and such. and then she is, kind of in this role of, she's kind of like a little girl. She's in her room. She's got her headphones on. I think the song
Yeah.
in that scene is, "Time of Your Life" from Dirty Dancing.
Yeah.
And she's jamming out to "Time of Your Life" while eating Fruit Loops. She's literally eating dry Fruit Loops. She's just kind of nibbling on Fruit Loops. And she's drinking a tall glass of milk with a straw. I mean, it's the most chilling scene ever. And I think, there's something about great horrors where they take the simplest concepts of innocence, right? A little girl, a clown, old people, and they just turn that around and they make it horrifying. And I think that's what really makes something a great horror.
Yeah, I guess that scene was pretty scary now that I think about it. What about you, Muck?
Man, I gotta say, Titus is like bumping up the score for me, man.
No,
it's
don't.
it's at least 86,
Get
87
out
now.
of here. Get out of here.
But yeah, so along the same lines, the scariest scene of the movie for me, besides the first scene, so the opening scene with that actor from Atlanta, Keith Stanfield, or he
Yeah.
plays, his character is Andrew Logan in the movie, or something like that.
Yeah.
He gets abducted in that white neighborhood, right? That part was in very kind of, you use the word chilling, and I like that word because really chilling introduction to the entire movie. Like, that's the first thing you see, and he just grabs him out of nowhere, and he's pretty much never heard from him again, or at least his real persona has never heard from him again. But yeah, other than that, back to Rose, the girl, like the scariest scene for me was the scene where Chris finds out that Rose is, or who Rose really is, that she's the person that's enticing all these people to pretty much, quote unquote, become part of her family and to get, brainwashed and get this procedure done. So when he finds those pictures of the ex-boyfriends and Georgina, the ex-best friend, and stuff like that, that part was just when the whole movie turned, when you realize that she was in on this all along.
Yeah, I mean, that part was pretty scary for me. So the beginning scene when the guy got abducted from the neighborhood, was that Rose's brother that took the guy?
Yeah.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of makes sense. So let's dive into more of like the deeper stuff, like the racial undertones, just the play or the satire on race here in this country. I think that's what the movie is all about. What would you say is like the overall theme or the overall message of Get Out, Muck?
Man, there's so much to kind of peel here. That's what I was saying. When we were preparing for this podcast, I was like, this could go one of two ways. Like, we could, like, kind of try to cram this into, like, a 35 or 40-minute podcast, or we could really drag it out into, like, a 2-part, 3-part talk about, all the different races and all the parts they play. I think the thing that was interesting to me was going back to Titus's original request, right? Like, he said, want to propose a podcast or social commentary on Get Out and its implications on America's racial tensions, including short commentary on the Asian Americans' role. Yeah. So I think that's maybe a good place to start for us, since all three of us are Asian American. I realized that there was one Asian American character, one Asian character overall in the whole movie, and he was part of the whole process, but he was kind of a little bit in the background, meaning he wasn't like all the way in. He wasn't exactly sure if he was going to bid on Chris during the auction, but he was definitely there at the auction. So the scene I'm talking about is before the auction starts, where everyone's just kind of mingling, and this is before Chris and Rose run off and they get the auction started, right? And the Asian guy goes up to Chris, and he's smiling and everything, and he just says, "Is the African American experience an advantage or a disadvantage?" So to me, this whole thing was kind of, I mean, we can talk about the black-white relations and everything later on, but specifically in terms of like Asian American relation with African American, there's always been some tension there, and I think the director here was trying to really pinpoint exactly what role the Asian American, maybe not what they should be playing, but what they currently are playing. Like I feel like they're as a race, we're just still trying to figure out like which side we're on. And from the outside looking in, we look like we're on kind of white guy's side or the majority side, even though we're also minority, which is designated by that there's only one of us in the entire movie. But at the same time, by that question he asked Chris about the African American experience being an advantage or disadvantage, I think that's really telling. Like I think it's I think it's still something that all of us are still trying to figure out in terms of, I mean, we can go into like our upbringing and stuff like that, but I feel like there's always been this sort of like tension there between Asian Americans and African Americans, at least from an upbringing standpoint.
Yeah, I feel like let's just tackle it all, one by one, and if it ends up being part 2, part 3, and so forth, that's good, right? Like I would say, even though I don't rate the movie at a 99 or 100 like Rotten Tomatoes, I would say that the great thing about the movie is the fact that we can even do a podcast about it. Like most movies, you watch it and you may ask your friend, like, hey, how was Guardians of Galaxy, or how was Logan and stuff. People
Yeah.
would say it's really entertaining or funny or sad or not as good as the first one, but you don't really get the discussion, the in-depth, feelings of how that person may be feeling because of that movie as you do with Get Out. So I mean that is one thing that is amazing about this movie. The fact that we're even doing like a 30-minute podcast about it.
Yeah.
But so let's tackle the first thing. The first thing, like you said, when the Asian character asks whether being an African American or the experience of being an African American is an advantageous or disadvantage point of view or perspective. What were your thoughts, Titus?
Yeah. I thought that what was crazy was just the depth of that question. And
Yeah.
I think my first response when going into this movie, knowing that it's about a social commentary and in a lot of ways a criticism on society. When I saw that Asian American character, my first thought was, wow, well, why is he in there?
Yeah.
Because I feel that I've experienced a lot of the same things that, say, Chris, the main character in the movie, has felt as well. So why is this Asian American character in here? And I when I first saw him, I was a bit taken aback, but when I started thinking about it a bit more, I think I just really started to see more of the depth of why he was included in there. And I think if anything, I was humbled. I like to see myself that see myself as a person that kind of seeks out racial reconciliation, or tries to make an effort to bridge gaps there. But to think that I, or really any other Asian American, has that down pat would just not be right. And I think that it's great that we often have these other reminders in our lives, this one being a perfect case, where we just have to pay serious attention to issues like this. We're not perfect at it, and I don't think that anybody does, but I think the goal is that we get closer to what racial reconciliation really means, and we understand each other better through that lens.
So let's spell it out real quick. So why do you think the Asian American or Asian character was a part of the movie?
So I think it's, so I was kind of reading up on this, and the whole movie is kind of this concept of racial appropriation, and some people say racial misappropriation. And for those kind of listening in, I'll just kind of define it here. Racial appropriation or misappropriation refers to the adoption of cultural elements in a colonial manner. Elements are copied from a minority culture by members of a more dominant culture, and these elements are used outside of their original cultural context, sometimes even against the expressly stated wishes of representatives of the originating culture. Often, the original meaning of these cultural elements is lost or distorted, and such displays are often viewed as disrespectful by members of the originating culture, or even as a form of segregation. And so, I think that these are great questions to ask. I think this question that uh, the, the Asian guy asks, what was it again? Is the African American experience an advantage or disadvantage?
Yeah,
I think that Asian Americans in particular somewhat struggle with that question.
for
And,
sure.
I think if you kind of look into this concept of the model minority,
Yeah.
uh, I think a lot of what I think history shows that white Americans have, uh, around World War times, had seen Asian Americans as kind of this model minority. Put your head down, work hard, and progress through society. And then from an Asian American perspective, I think that some of that reigns true. But then there's also uh, so look at it this way: African Americans have a history that uh, where their culture has been severely oppressed,
Yes.
and Asians will never have that experience exactly. Uh, Asians were brought over to America, and Asians came over to America,
Yeah.
and they were enslaved,
Yeah.
right? African
no
Americans
choice.
had no choice.
Yeah.
They were brought over as slaves.
Yeah.
And so it's somewhat of a it's a very different
Very different. Yes.
experience. The thing is, I think if you look at America now, as far as minorities go, some of the most successful minorities are African Americans. I mean, if you look at Hollywood, if you look at the sports world,
Yeah.
a lot of extremely successful African Americans are at the top
Yeah.
as far as minorities go.
Props to Barack Obama, but yeah, continue.
Hmm. Now, if you look at that same demographic from an Asian perspective,
Yeah.
it's much more toned down.
True.
Of course, as a whole, the African American body is still extremely oppressed, right? So a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of disadvantages to
Yeah.
that. And I think that this is kind of the heart of what that question was getting at. I mean, there are some, very obvious advantages from a minority perspective
Yeah.
as far as successfulness, but I think overall there are so many disadvantages that it's just, in some ways, it's almost an unfair question to be asking.
Yeah. Man, I'm almost up to like a 90, 89, 90 now.
I kind
I
of
like-
want to stop this podcast before you get to 99 minutes.
No, I love that response. I think, yeah, I definitely got all that. I've been reading a ton recently. Just happened to be reading about, how the model minority thing got started, and just cultural appropriation in general. But the part that I kind of took from that question as well, kind of taking a step back in a general sense, he's asking this question to this guy Chris, and he's smiling, he's being friendly, he's mingling with them. Chris thinks that he's just curious. It's a kind of odd question, but harmless question at that, right? That's what Chris thinks. But this whole thing is leading up to this silent auction. So the whole thing is pretty much this Asian guy. He's curious. He wonders about whether or not it's worth it for him, or whether he has anything to gain to bid on this black guy, to own this black guy. Versus, and I thought it was really, I don't know if coincidental, probably not, but very telling that the auction was silent as well. So you have him there in the background, and he's part of the auction. He doesn't win it, but he's still, his silence still condemns Chris, right? Like, he's sitting there in the background. He's just raising his paddle, being part of the general festivities, not saying anything, kind of really being kind of like what you were talking about, Titus, like being the model minority, just head down, not making much noise, not bringing much attention to himself, just going along with the flow. And to be honest, like, I see a lot of that now with even today with especially with the older generation. I feel like there's just very little. It's more like we're taught to kind of mind our own business, kind of succeed on our own, work hard, study hard, and just succeed on our own, and don't really worry about anyone else, especially not like another minority or someone else that's at a disadvantage, right? Like, and I see that right now in all these cases coming out, like it's never even talked about on from an Asian American standpoint. I feel like, or at least not the older generation. Like it's just, it doesn't phase anyone. You know what I mean? Like something happens, like what happened in Dallas. What's his name? Jordan Edwards, I think. That kid that got shot in Dallas, like it's just not brought up in the Asian community. It just another day, and so that's kind of what I got out of that specific question as well from the movie. You talked about how, Titus, during the movie, like you thought that Asian's part was interesting because for a long part of the movie, like you felt more, or you sympathized more with Chris's side, right? So one thing that really struck out to me was kind of comparing the racial ignorance of Rose early in the movie. So Rose early in the movie, when she's kind of describing the trip they're going to take to meet her parents, and then Chris is like, they know I'm black, right? And they're like, no, but my parents would have voted for Obama a third time and all this stuff. Just kind of the racial ignorance of Rose versus the actual meeting when Chris meets Rose's dad, and talks about how he's well-meaning and all that, but he brings up that exact point. So I thought that was interesting. Just I think a lot of people, everyone can kind of associate with the whole meeting the parents, going back and meeting parents for the first time, and it's just very interesting from a biracial standpoint, interracial relationship standpoint. But what did you think about those two? I know, Titus, you talked about maybe that something like this happened to you before.
Yeah, it's really funny because I hyped this movie up for my coworkers just as much as I hyped it up for you guys.
Super hype.
Yeah, and so what's funny is one of my buddies at work, he told me that he had watched the movie over the weekend, and he had brought not only his wife, but his wife's parents who were in town visiting as well. So they did the whole Alamo Drafthouse thing, Austin experience, and in his mind it was going to be a great time. Me hyping it up and all, I hate spoiling stuff for people too. So I really didn't prepare him much.
Yeah.
As far as what the movie was about. So my buddy, he is. His family's lineage is with Native Americans, so he's large part Native American, and then I think a certain percentage Mexican, and his wife is white. She's Caucasian American too, meaning that her parents are also Caucasian Americans, and so we just thought it was hilarious that he had brought his parents or his step parents to watch this particular movie. The way that he explained it was that his wife's parents are extremely white, and they came out of that movie and he thought it was amazing, but then part of him still felt like he should apologize to her parents, which was interesting. And so he was kind of like feeling awkward and just kind of telling her parents, hey, sorry, if that kind of, rang the wrong bell or whatnot. And they kind of just shrugged it off. They're like, no, it's okay and all. But I just thought that was, kind of silly and, very representative, I guess, of what exactly this movie was trying to embody in interracial relationships. What I think is even more interesting, though, is we all know Jordan Peele directed this movie. He is married. He is in an interracial relationship, and so I think that speaks even more truly of where this comes from. Of just trying to understand each other better and trying to get messages out there on why microaggressions are not a good thing and can build up to a lot more. Obviously, this is a satire, so everybody ends up dying in the end, and that's not what we want. But I think just this theme of microaggressions and making people feel uncomfortable they're not good things at all. One thing that I had kind of read about this was how, as a whole, Get Out was trying to help people better understand what um, what liberal white racism looked like. And I think we
Yeah.
all know what the alt-right looks like, and what neo-Nazism looks like. But not everybody understands this concept of liberal white racism. And I think part of that is ignorance. Part of that may be just naivety and such. So it's it's a problem, and microaggressions in our society are a problem. We saw them all throughout the movie. Tiger Woods references. I voted for Obama too.
Yeah.
I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable with our housekeeper being African American. I mean, they were just scattered across this movie, and I think they were so real that they really did add to that chilling effect of this movie too.
Yeah, that's a good call, man. Albert, you might want to stop this soon. I'm up to like a 94 now, 95.
But I think so. So yeah, obviously, like the discussions and the way that it's raised awareness towards all the different racial undertones is good. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, and I'm not saying that's why the movie shouldn't be rated so high. It's just, I don't know, like it's more of it's more of like the after effect of the movie. I don't think that should increase the rating of the movie. I don't know. It's kind of like, it's almost like recency bias. Like I feel like because we're talking about it so much and we're getting so deep, and it's kind of like opening our eyes to all the different angles and stuff from the movie. It's raising your score. So
Albert also doesn't believe that MVP should factor in the playoffs of the NBA championship.
Yeah.
The regular season MVP.
It's just, I'm gonna go back to that rating thing. It's just so hard to rate it, like just from a movie standpoint, it's you can't give it that high of a score. But I mean, look at this. We're talking about this. I mean, Albert, you just saw it last week, I think, but I saw it 3 months ago. Titus, you probably saw it,
Wait, you
earlier
saw
than
it
that.
3 months ago?
Yeah. So it's just,
dang.
And we're still talking about it now, and it just brings up so many questions and so many conversations that need to be had. So yeah, I think I give Jordan Peele a ton of credit for this movie. I didn't know that part about him being in an interracial relationship himself, and I think that shows through in a lot of the just uneasy scenes that are in this. Like when they first meet the parents, and her dad, is smiling, but he's like doesn't want to say anything, but he's like, first time he realizes he's black, and he's like, so how long has this thing been going on? And I think a lot of people can relate to that. Just maybe not necessarily from the racial standpoint, but just going back to like kind of a Meet the Parents or Meet the Fockers kind of movie. Like everyone has kind of been through that.
Yeah, so I don't want you guys to kind of speak on behalf of a certain race or a certain demographic, but what would you hope that this movie would, I guess, aid in terms of, if you were speaking to like the Caucasian population, like what do you hope this movie to do? Like, how do you want them to react to this movie?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. I haven't talked to any Caucasian or any of my white coworkers or anything about this movie yet. I have talked to a couple of other, I guess they're also minorities. I've talked to African American guy and so on and so forth, and other people at the gym as well. And I think the most important thing to me is that these conversations are just taking place, and I like the fact that this movie makes everyone uneasy. I think that's a good feeling to have when watching this movie. I feel like if you're not uneasy, then you're probably not seeing it correctly. You're probably kind of taking it as face value. But if it makes you a little uneasy, a little uncomfortable, then I think that's what Jordan Peele was trying to aim at.
Yeah, and then on the other side, like if you let's say you were, African American, how should you take this movie, and what should you expect from whether it's your minority brethren or the majority, the white um, Caucasian population? Like, how do you want to be treated from now on, or how do you like? Obviously, the movie's going to stir discussion, but does it really like? At the end of the day, what you want, like the end game, is for change to happen. So, how should you take this movie, and how should you, promote that change?
I mean, I think I just mentioned discussion because I think it has to start there, right? These have to take place so that we can kind of get on the same page and realize that there are these things going on, kind of behind the scenes, these microaggressions, if you will. But at the same time, just talking about it doesn't do anything. You're right. Like we have to put it in action in terms of, at the very least, at least being sympathetic to other minorities or other people's struggles. I think that's a big thing. You see, these people that are really hurting right now. Every day there's another tragedy happening, and unfortunately, a lot of times it's from the African American community, whether it's police relations or whatever it might be. But I'd love to see that sort of compassion or that sort of activism coming from, I'll say myself, from an Asian American community, and not just kind of keeping our heads down and continuing this model minority myth, but instead just really digging deep and being like, this kind of thing could happen to anybody, and who are we to kind of turn a blind eye when this happens to someone outside of our immediate race or immediate ethnicity?
Okay. So yeah, I have, I guess, one more tough question before I want to get into y'all's final thoughts or final beliefs about the movie. So that obviously there's the main character Chris, who is African American, and it's a depiction of how just absurd oppression, or how they're treated it by by the majority, by Caucasian or white America. But then you also have, like we alluded to, the Asian character. How come we don't see other ethnicities? How come we don't see the Native American side? How come we don't see the Mexican side, or the Latino side, or the European side? Like, if it's a racial movie that wants to be kind of inclusive, or kind of call out the pitfalls of how society is today, shouldn't it include all of the different ethnicities?
That is a great question. um, for me, it came down to that it's calling out the Asian community.
Okay.
Granted, there's only one of us in the movie, but I think that kind of goes hand in hand with kind of the percentage of Asians there are in America. I mean, it's not that much, but at the same time, I feel like we as Asians are kind of more or less the only ones that have been completely adopted over to the white America side. I feel like we're not necessarily in the same positions of power or whatnot, but we've been accepted overall as a race, I feel like, and I don't think that that's the case with any other minority.
Titus, do you have any final thoughts? I know Mock just said that Asian Americans have this acceptance, or have more of an acceptance than, let's say, African Americans from white America. But I know, like, so I've been friends with Titus for like 30 years, and throughout our times as friends, he's alluded to me many times. It's like, hey, did you feel that? Like, when we went to dinner, this and that, or when we went to a trip here and there, he would ask if I felt some type of subtle or not so subtle racism, because I feel like, Titus, you're a lot more perceptive when it comes to those type of things, and you also have more of a reaction than I do when you do feel those things. So do you believe we've been accepted more so?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways I can definitely agree with Mock on that. I think we have been somewhat accepted or assimilated into this culture of white America as well. And I think a big part of that is just the concept of the American dream. of working hard, of putting your head down, and not taking anything from anybody, but just working hard and doing stuff on your own, and that leading to success. And I think, unfortunately, we just don't live in a world where you're supposed to do everything by yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely one of the flaws in a lot of ways of uh, of our culture, but I think of all cultures. I think the bottom line is, I feel that this movie brought a lot of awareness to uh, cultural appropriation, to drawing lines, to misconceptions and stereotypes about different races and such. But the reality is that you know it was kind of framed from the perspective of uh, you know liberal white racism. But at the end of the day, none of us are perfect, and
Yeah.
for this entire thing to work, uh, for racial reconciliation to truly occur, everybody has to play a role in it. And who am I to say that I've never put on any microaggressions to other people of other races, or that other people of other races, whether white or black or Hispanic or whatnot, haven't put on microaggressions to me. I think it's just a little naive to say that anybody's perfect at it. And
Yeah.
so I definitely agree with Mock. I think the whole play on awareness and to even have conversations about this are just much better than not. And I think the goal is that we look at this together and we continue talking about these things, and as a society, we get to a point where we really are the United States of America, and
Yeah.
we're not a country that's just constantly divided by issues of race.
All right. Wow. That was probably by far the deepest Six Pennies podcast we've ever had. And it's all thanks to Jordan Peele. Like, thank you for directing such a great movie. I'm not going to say a perfect movie, but a great
I'm at
movie.
100.
Okay. But it kind of wants me to get more of my friends and more of my coworkers to watch the movie, just so they're more aware of what's going on out there. And thanks again, everyone, for listening to Six Pennies podcast. Thank you, Titus, for guest appearing, and Mock, as always. Please follow us on Facebook at Six Pennies Podcast and subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you.